We've been talking the last few episodes about how to push yourself further in your career than you might even think you're capable of. But what happens when something doesn't go as planned? Women often take failures hard. And in fact, it can be debilitating and even derail your career if you don't recover effectively from it. I really want you to listen to this entire episode so that you can let go of the mistakes from your past and have a toolkit for the inevitable failures you will encounter along your way in leadership. It does not serve you to hang on to them because each one holds you back in a small way until you intentionally address this issue. I'm Jill Avey, a career success coach, and this is SisterSmart Leadership, the show that explores how women can rise from director to vice president and beyond by fully leaning into their feminine energy as their biggest advantage. Let's get you one step closer to the recognition and promotion you deserve. You might not think you're carrying any regrets on a daily basis, but I assure you they are there draining you of potential until you stop to think them through. So if you've done this work already, congratulations. And if not, give yourself a big hug because you're in good company. We all make mistakes and we all have failures, even big ones. And I want you to celebrate the big ones because it means you tried something significant and you've learned something new. When I first started my job in the ski business, I'd only skied twice. So I had the privilege of learning how to ski from professionals who'd been skiing their entire lives. And one of the first pieces of advice that I got was if I wasn't falling, I wasn't pushing myself enough. And I've taken this advice throughout my entire career. I see far too many people playing it safe in their careers, even though they have big ambitions and they know they have a lot of potential, yet they stay in jobs too long and they don't take that sort of stretch assignments that are going to get them noticed. They hold back and they don't invest in themselves to get the leadership training that they need to move up. And they stay stuck as a result. So let's talk today about what you can do to avoid stalling out in the same way. We cover this topic in depth in the SisterSmart leadership programs, and I want to share some of what we do with you today. So first, let's talk about what types of failure we're talking about here in the workplace. So there could be things like failed projects. You might miss a deadline or have unhappy customers or an unhappy colleague, or maybe your project runs over budget and people are very happy about that. You might have a product launch that flunked or failed, or worse, it got recalled. Or maybe you had somebody complain about you, a colleague or a senior leader, or even a direct report. Perhaps you didn't get promoted, or maybe you had your manager sour on you. Maybe you got laid off. That can feel like a failure, whether it had anything to do with your performance or not. Maybe you got fired. I can tell you all those things have happened to me sometime in my career. Or maybe you've been the center of a scandal or a lawsuit. There are many more ways that we can fail in our workplace. So why is it so hard when you have a failure? Why do we do this? This is because we're held to higher standards from the time we enter school. Girls are not allowed to, make mistakes as much. We get reprimanded more for our mistakes, and we don't get the brush it off and get back up kind of advice that little boys get. In addition, we have smaller social networks to draw from when we do have a mistake. So we don't have as many people that can help us to think these things through and to pat us on the back and tell us, good try, you'll do better next time. We're less likely to have somebody talk about it to help us determine what was our fault and what wasn't. And women are worriers. Let's face it, we're more likely to ruminate about things that went wrong for even a very long time, sometimes decades even. So the mistake that we make is believing that we should therefore stay safe and not push into unknown territory. We think that if we play it safe, that this will lead to more success and happiness. But instead, we end up feeling unfulfilled because we know we have potential that's not being used. We see others do bigger things, and we know deep inside that we could be too. But still, we hold back. You might be asking, okay, how can failure actually help us in our career, though? The big thing, you learn from failure. One of our members in our Sisters in Leadership community, Leanne Chakowski, is a neuroscientist at Northeastern University. And we talked about how we can learn more from direct experience than we do from success. So she explained to me, our brains are amazing prediction machines. We are constantly making predictions about the state of the world and the results that would occur if we made different kinds of actions. And so she calls this a different class of neural responses that occur when a result of an action goes not as we predicted it to. For example, Let's say if I predicted to get a substantial raise and instead I received a much smaller raise than the expected increase. In this case, my brain would signal a prediction error. So this type of signal is believed to be really important because it helps us learn to make better future actions. And so it sticks with us longer. And even more interesting is that the social context modifies the strength of the signal. Back to our example. When I learned that I didn't receive my expected raise, but my colleague did, this error signal would be stronger than if I experienced the loss without that social comparison. So we want to take two things away from this knowledge. First, it's kind of cool that there's a brain-based reason why a public failure often stings more than a private failure. And two, more importantly, our neural hardware has evolved to help us learn from failures so that we can make better decisions in the future, decisions that lead to positive outcomes. So if we respond to the failure by completely avoiding future scenarios that are related to that failure, then the learning is wasted. It's useful instead to really consider what aspects of the situation could offer useful feedback that can help improve future decisions. And this is why we work in our Sisters in Leadership program on this. We take a look at what is the internal factor and what are the external factors so we can see what was our responsibility and what was outside of our control. And that way we know what we can let go of and what we need to learn from. And the second thing is that failure is also how we build confidence. In our program, the entire program is designed to develop confidence. But making friends with failure is a big part of this because falling down and getting back up is a really important piece of building our confidence. Once you've gone through a big hardship, then you know that you can go through something like that again and you can recover because you have that experience from it. And women come to confidence more slowly than men do. I've heard anecdotally that it takes women 10 years longer to come to their confidence than men do. And while I don't have research to back that up, it was my experience. And it's also what I see in my coaching business. This also makes sense when you consider how avoiding failure could be contributing to that. Because if we stay stuck in perfectionism, we aren't remembering all the things that we did well as much as we're remembering all the things that we didn't do well. And that perfectionism can kind of feed that cycle of trying harder and harder to make everything right because we don't want to have those failures. But instead, if we can really embrace the failure and see it as a learning opportunity, that's going to help us gain that confidence a lot better. When I was writing this episode, I happened to have a coaching call with a client who had a failure recently, and she wanted me to share her story in order to help others who face the same situation. Her division is going through a stressful time, and it just got reorged. So reorgs are always hard, but this situation was especially difficult because there's been so much strife for the last several years. My client's only been with the company for a year and has been trying to help turn things around, and she's been making great strides with it. The whole department was together for the first time in many months to explore what this reorg meant for each team. Anxiety was so high during the whole entire meeting, and on day 4, my client was told that she had a new role during the meeting with no previous warning to this. And she was taken aback and confused about what she would be doing in this new complicated format. And she voiced her concerns about that. As she spoke, she realized that she should not be saying anything. And she has regretted it ever since because her peer that was rolling out the changes felt put on the spot, even though that was not her intention. She came to our call wanting to talk about how she could bring her better self to this kind of situation in the future. So as we talked, we explored what happened on a physiological level. As the human body experiences stress and anxiety, our reaction is to want to stop that anxiety as fast as possible. And this will cause us to say things before we have time to properly think them through. So understanding that this physiological response is what is going to happen to us in these kind of situations is the first thing that we need to do when preparing for a stressful situation. So let me just say here that we are always going to encounter these kinds of stressful situations, especially the higher up you go. So it really makes sense to want to prepare for them. So as we talked, she came up with 4 powerful messages that she could say to herself when she's feeling anxious to quell the need to speak at that moment because she wanted to give herself time. She wanted to give herself time to really decide if it was time to speak or not. So the first thing that she decided on was take time to breathe. This always gives us that moment to consider what the best response is. And the second message that she wanted to give herself here was, I don't have power here, but I am not powerless. So this wasn't the time for her to have any power. The power was in the person's hands that was running the meeting. but she also has power in other circumstances and around the situation. The third thing that she's wanted to say to herself is to look for the person's good intentions. What's positive in this situation? And that helps her to see the person from a different light versus that anxiety feeling that she was feeling and operating more out of her primitive brain. This will help her to switch to more of an empathetic standpoint. And then the fourth thing is a little mantra for her. I see some concerns here, but I want to see how it plays out before I judge. And so her overall takeaway from this situation is that she needs to pay attention to the anxiety in her body and take care of that first. And then she could figure out if she can add value to the conversation without making things worse. So when a client has a failure, I like to take them through some thought exercises that she found valuable. I first had her consider how she could forgive herself for making this mistake. She said that this might be more of a struggle for her, so we started with compassion instead. She said she could feel compassion for her colleagues, that they were also acting in the same anxious way. And I asked her then to try to apply this same compassion to herself. Often, if we start in that mode of feeling the compassion for someone else, that could be a good bridge to be able to apply it to yourself. But that still felt challenging to her. So I had her think about what she would tell her daughter if she had the same sort of situation happen at school. And I loved what she said. It was, the mistake doesn't lessen your talent and worth. It does not change how I believe in you. I know you will use this experience as an opportunity for learning and growth. Isn't that beautiful? So I asked her to apply that to herself. And then we also talked about the internal and external forces in this situation. She was a human being in a room where everyone was anxious. In her brain, her mirror neurons were reflecting everyone else's anxiety and further amplifying her own anxiety. So I gave her the analogy of how on the Survivor show, they put everybody under so much stress that they crack and behave badly. And this makes for good TV, but it makes for bad company meetings. So yes, she's 100% responsible for her own behavior and has a plan to keep her cool next time. But she was also in a situation where she was not set up to be her best self. At the end of our session, I asked her what she was taking from our time. And she said that she was going to approach her peer from that place of forgiveness, compassion, and grace. She will apologize for how she reacted and tell her that she would do her best to make the new plan successful and get the job done. I know that this amazing, talented leader grew by leaps and bounds from this one moment. And by analyzing the situation that we did together, she was able to glean important lessons that will exponentially increase her likelihood to be cool in the face of anxiety next time. Well, it's uncomfortable as heck for us to go through. As you know now, there is no better way to learn. Brene Brown talks about putting yourself in the ring and daring greatly. She tells the story of running into the quote from Theodore Roosevelt that changed everything for her. And it reads, "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs and comes up short again and again, because there is no effort without error or shortcoming, but who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at worst, if he fails, at least he fails, daring greatly. It is not a question of whether you will fail as a senior later, but when. Life is full of ups and downs, and no career takes a path straight to the top. You can look at other people's failure with more compassionate understanding, and this will help you take more risk. So at the end of every episode, I like to give you 3 shifts that you can make today to put what we just talked about into place. So I'd like you to think about first, what is a failure that you've had? I'd like you to just think for a moment and identify one. Second, how can you be compassionate towards yourself about that situation? How can you expand your understanding of both the internal and the external forces in that situation and give yourself a little more grace? Thirdly, about what did you learn from this experience? Can you see how that you learned more from that failure than you might have if everything went well? So what's one lesson that you learned from something not going as you liked? Let us know in the comments if you're watching this on YouTube. We'd love to hear about your learnings. If you want to start playing a bigger game and taking more risk, I invite you to consider enrolling in our Sisters in Leadership program, where we learn to make friends with failure as one part of our 7-step passport to promotion. And if you have a risk that you're considering taking, check out our decision tree framework that's linked in the show notes. It can help you take more risk by understanding which ones are going to have the biggest payoff. If you want to dive deeper into women's leadership and how to move up in your career, subscribe either on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. I'm on a mission to help more women get into leadership and stay there. And if that's aligned with you, I'd love to have you be part of this community and tune into more episodes on SisterSmart leadership that will support you in becoming the leader that you want to be. If you're ready to fully lean into your feminine leadership and get promoted from director to vice president and beyond, hit that subscribe button so you'll get all the episodes to come. And check out the recommended video here to see how women are rising up without playing by the old rules that built these male-dominated industries and systems.